So earlier this week, Bethesda announced at E3 that we are getting our first pack-based expansion for the Elder Scrolls Legends, which is incredibly exciting, and it's Heroes of Skyrim. It's coming out on June 29th. I'm sure you've probably seen the trailer. If you haven't, I highly recommend going to check it out. There's also a blog post on the Bethesda.net website for the Elder Scrolls Legends that has some additional information as well about what we can expect. Things like dragons and so forth that you would expect from Skyrim, obviously. But today on Twitter, because people were going to be playing with some of the cards at E3, they did a series of reveals. In fact, we got to see 5 legendary cards revealed via Twitter today. There's one for each attribute, and we're going to go ahead and take a look at them. For this video, I'm not going to necessarily talk about whether they're good or bad, because at this point with so little revealed it's kind of hard to tell, but each of them kind of showcase an interesting either tidbit or direction for the next expansion, and because of at least what they're inferring, I think it's going to be kind of cool to talk about what we might see or what we could expect to see potentially in some of the other cards. So let's take a look. So the first of the cards that we're going to look at is the Strength Legendary, and that is Ulfric Stormcloak. Now, this card is a unique legendary, like you might expect, because he has a name. Again, if you're kind of new to the Elder Scrolls Legends, legendary cards aren't always unique. Typically, the ones that are unique represent something very specific in Elder Scrolls lore, so like a specific person, place, item, and so forth. Ulfric Stormcloak is a 5-cost creature. He's a 6/5 for stats, which is actually pretty good stats, but the reason that he's interesting is because of his text. So he reads that he has Breakthrough, and when you play a shout, you draw a random Nord from your deck. Now, this is interesting for a number of reasons. First, you may have noticed the word shout. Shouts are confirmed to be in this new expansion. We do not know what they are going to be yet. We do know, however, that they increase in power the more of them that you play, or the more times you play them. At least that's what the article said. So we know shouts are a thing. The other thing that this introduces, though, is like the idea of a Nord tribal theme. It's interesting because anytime you see something where it says like draw a random X from your deck or play a random X from your deck, you can usually build your deck in a way to manipulate it. That's kind of the whole point behind, say, the Chanter of Akatosh monk list that's rolling around right now, where you play a bunch of 1-cost actions and Chanter, so that you can basically play Chanter and then flood the board with Ungolem and then the Brotherhood Assassins, right? It's typically something that's random, but because it's from your deck, you can build around it and accordingly. And Stormcloak is no different, right? It's going to say a random Nord, but if you limit the number of Nords that are in your deck, you might be able to use him as a pretty effective tutor for some specific cards. Now, because he is a unique legend, however, it does mean that it's not something that you're going to be able to rely on. It's not going to be like Altar of Despair or Chanter, because you could run 3 copies of those, and so you could use those as an engine, but still, it is interesting to think about this card in this way. Or it could just be like a raw, like, card advantage engine. Again, we can't speak to power levels here, but I do think about like a mid-range warrior deck where if you have Stormcloak and maybe like Gortwog, every time he's coming up on your turn, you're getting free creatures. Every time you play shouts with Ulfric on the board, you're getting creatures that go to your hand. That, you know, warrior set would already run Jarl. Now, granted, those are like the top end, but basically you could have like a mid-range warrior version that's just meant to never run out of gas. So maybe like less on the orc theme and more on just the like I'm gonna keep playing things forever theme. Again, we don't know because we haven't seen anything, so it's really hard to judge power level, but I do like that this connects to shouts. I'm really eager to see what they do, and I do kind of like the like I said, like Nord tribal theme slash maybe like Tudor engine theme here. Worst case scenario, he's still a 6/5 a breakthrough for 5, which isn't too shabby, so there's always that. But let's go ahead and let's move on to the intelligence reveal. So this is another unique legendary card. This is a support card, however, and it's the College of Winterhold. This also costs 5, but it has 3 uses. When you activate it, you reveal 3 random 1-cost actions. Now, it doesn't say from your deck, so I'm going to assume that this is more like Moment of Clarity, right? Like when it says reveal, it's not like reveal from your deck, it's just that it will have a random 3 card selection here. If you've played Hearthstone, I would imagine it's going to be very similar to like the Discover mechanic, but anyway. You reveal 3 random 1-cost actions. You choose one to put in your hand, or basically to draw that one, but then, interestingly, you increase the cost of the cards revealed by 1. So the first time you play it and activate it, you get to choose a 1-cost action to put in your hand, which is pretty sweet because there's a lot of decent 1-cost actions. I think of things like Shadow Shift and Firebolt and Execute. So like right out of the gate, even if this gets blown up, right, even if the support card is destroyed, there's a good chance that you'll get some value. Obviously paying 5 to add like a Firebolt to your hand isn't like super ideal, but the fact that you're going to be playing this likely in some sort of control deck, and you'd be playing this when you're taking a low tempo turn anyway and or generating card advantage is kind of offsetting that. But again, that's like speculation stuff. We don't know what's coming, but that's just in the current balance of things. But that's the first time you activate it. So the second time you get a 2-cost, and then the third time you get a 3-cost. So that third one could fetch you, you know, Crushing Blow or Mummify. The second one could fetch you Moment of Clarity. Could fetch you a number of different good and bad cards in the 2 slot, actually. Like, I think of things like Finish Off, but I also think of things like Wisdom of the Ancients, right? That being said, you have 3 cards revealed, so it's not like you're stuck with whatever you get. But I think there is some pretty decent variance at the 2 slot. You'll have to forgive me, I'm a little bit foggy today, so if I'm missing something really obvious there, I'm sorry. But the thing that does stand out to me, however, is that this could combo really well, for example, with the creature that gives you unlimited uses of your supports. So this is typically meant to give you a 1-cost, a 2-cost, and a 3-cost, but even if you play that guy for just like 1, you know, turn's activation, then that's eventually going to push you into the 4-cost. And if that guy survives for a turn, that pushes you into the 5-cost. And once you get to 4, you're talking about potentially Lightning Bolt plus whatever has been revealed. When you get to 5, it's potentially Piercing Javelin plus, again, whatever else has been revealed, either by the card, and then also, I mean, clearly we're going to get more actions in the new set, right? So there could be some cool stuff there. That's another thing to note, is that looking at this card for value right now is going to be difficult because you're going to be thinking about it in terms of what already exists, but we are going to get new cards, which is going to like increase the variance, right? So you can't say, for example, you know, say like, well, there's only, you know, X number of, you know, 3-cost cards, so if you get it to that, you've got a X% chance to get Crushing Blow. We don't know because, again, it's a new expansion. We can expect new actions probably in those cost slots, and that will affect the variance. But overall, I think the card is interesting. I think that it's got some really cool potential. As I said, it synergizes well with the creature who gives you unlimited uses. Maybe we'll see some more like support use manipulation in the future. In previous episodes of The Forge, for example, had talked about just that, the idea of getting more uses or taking away uses from supports. So it would be kind of cool if they throw that in, but yeah, College of Winterhold. Let's go ahead and take a look at the agility one. The agility legendary card is the last of the unique legendaries that was revealed. This is what I assume is Brynjolf. I'm pretty horrible with like the Nordic pronunciation, but I feel like it's Brynjolf. This is yet another 5-cost card. I promise they're not all a 5-cost. But this is another 5-cost card. Brynjolf is a 4/4 with Drain. He's also a Nord, which means that Ulfric could fetch him. But he's a 4/4 Drain, and whenever a friendly creature pilfers or drains, gain +1 magicka this turn. Now, this is interesting because it is like the perfect harmony of a couple of things that we've already seen as potential themes in agility, which tells me that they might be going even further down this path. So agility is typically paired with endurance to create like the ramp class, right? Ramp Scout has been around since like the dawn of the game. Things that ramp up your magicka permanently have been in endurance. However, there are things like the Crook, I think it's Torval Crook. Again, my head is really foggy, so I apologize if that's wrong. But basically the Pilfer guy who gives you 2 extra magicka this turn does exist in agility. And this guy, also in agility, gives you temporary magicka this turn. We have from the Fall of the Dark Brotherhood, the things that generate completed contracts, which give you temporary magicka. So clearly, agility is becoming the home, or like the permanent residence, if you will, of temporary bursts of magicka, right? Agility is going to end up being the thing where you, in the future, potentially like chain together for like efficient plays, where you play like 8 costs worth of cards, but for like 5 magicka because you do silly things, right? So the other theme that stands out to me is Drain. The most recent monthly reward card was the Protector of the Main, which has Drain, and he got bigger when he would either drain or when other things would gain you health. Basically, it was like this health gain mechanic, and we've seen Drain already on some other agility creatures, like the bats, right? The Werebat and the Giant Bat. So Drain appears to be another keyword that's going to probably pop up a fair bit in agility. The other kind of interesting thing is that this triggers off of Pilfer as well, which really makes me wonder what like Quinral Burglar does in this scenario, because it says pilfers or drains, but that instance would be both pilfering and drain, and I assume that they would resolve separately. So at least in my head, something like Quinral Burglar would give you +2 magicka for the turn. I don't think that's enough to obviously thrust that card into suddenly being playable, but if there are cheaper versions of the Burglar or similar mechanics, this guy could become interesting in his own right. So again, it's hard to judge whether or not he's good without seeing the other cards revealed. Just with what we know about the game currently, he doesn't seem super exciting, just because he's 5 for a 4/4 body, which as we know is typically like a death sentence if it doesn't do something immediately. So like Shadowfen Priest gets away with it because it has great utility that occurs right when you play it, but cards like Quinral Burglar, for example, have struggled. Maybe the most famous, like, at least in my opinion, 5-cost 4/4 that actually saw play as Markarth Bannerman, but that's because legitimately, like, 95% of the time, if you got 1 attack off, like, you just won the game, because of all of the other synergies with Nord Firebrand. So, yeah, I mean, again, we can't really judge, but his stats do make me worry a little bit, so moving on to the next attribute, we're going to take a look at Endurance. Endurance did not get a legendary creature that was unique, but they did get a legendary creature. In this case, it is Skeletal Dragon. Skeletal Dragon costs 8. See, I told you they didn't all cost 5. And the Skeletal Dragon is a 5/5 with Guard, but it has a very, very interesting summon ability. So it reads, summon, give all creatures in your discard pile +2/+2. And then it also has a last gasp of, draw a random creature from your discard pile. Now, this is interesting to me because if you were playing when the Fall of the Dark Brotherhood first came out, our buddy, the Shadow Scale with Slay, had a bug where if he killed another creature and then died, he was retaining his +1/+1 from the Slay while in the graveyard. And that ended up being corrected as a bug, but now we do see that creatures in your discard pile can receive buffs. So I find that to be rather interesting because that makes me wonder if that might actually come back in terms of the Slay mechanics, or if that was a bug that was related to this upcoming feature. But clearly, things in your discard pile can receive buffs. Now, I find that very interesting for a couple of reasons. Number one, they're very clearly meant to follow that creature wherever it goes. So you buff the creatures in your discard pile, and then this returns one to your hand. I'm going to be hard-pressed to buy the idea that the buffs aren't going to follow it to your hand, right? So you got a 1/1 in the grave, you play Skeletal Dragon, it becomes a 3/3, Last Gasp triggers, that card goes to your hand. I'm going to guess it's still a 3/3 in your hand. So if the buffs start following the creatures, which, by the way, is not something new for Direwolf Digital, that's actually the way that it works in Eternal. But if they start following the creatures, there are interesting things that can occur as well, such as like silencing creatures in the discard pile, or buffing creatures in your hand, or in your deck, and having the buffs still follow it wherever they go. Again, if you're familiar with Direwolf Digital's other card game, Eternal, that has a ability in the game where creatures that are in your deck get buffed, and then those buffs like follow it wherever it goes. So it'll buff like the top one of your deck, and when you draw it, if it was a 1/1 but it's been buffed, it might be like a 3/3. This card gives me hope that there might be similar mechanics in this game, which I think are super interesting. As do, I think, like silencing things in the graveyard is super interesting, right? The idea of like silencing something so that it doesn't retain the buffs in the grave. When the Fall of the Dark Brotherhood came out, I tried like hell to get Reanimation as a deck archetype to work. I tried and I tried and I tried. I did some cheeky things. I played like a turn 4 Odahviing once, but the deck was not good, was not competitive. But seeing cards like this, again, hopefully tells me that Reanimation-themed decks are still on their radar, and that we might see that as a playstyle or an archetype in the future. So that also has me very, very excited. Overall, I think the art on this card is fantastic, though I think the art on all of the ones that we've seen so far are pretty good. So yeah, that's Skeletal Dragon. Finally, our last attribute, which is Willpower. Willpower does not actually get a creature. This card is an action, and it's still a legend, but it's not a unique legend, and it's called a Land Divided. Now, this card costs 8, and it also has some very unique like text. So it says, fill the left lane with Stormcloak aggressors, or the right lane with Colovian troopers. So you don't get to do both. You have to pick, and you have to pick whether you want to be, you know, defensive or not. We're going to go out on a limb and say that a card called Stormcloak Aggressors is probably not defensive, right? Sounds very aggressive, but we haven't actually seen what that card is yet. So it's still interesting to me because it sounds like it's either being defensive or aggressive, and they correspond with like the appropriate lanes. Like typically the Shadow lane is considered a defensive lane because when you play things there you get favorable trades. The field lane is typically the one you want control of if you're trying to be aggressive, so the aggressive cards going into the field lane, and the defensive cards going in the defensive lane is interesting. Though the fact that the Colovian troopers have guard kind of takes away the benefit of the Shadow lane traditionally, so that's also interesting. The fact that this is in Willpower means it can be combined with things like Divine Fervor. We might see tokens come back. If you're not familiar, tokens was a very prominent archetype in the end of closed and the early parts of open beta. the nerf to Divine Fervor and the rise of some other decks really kind of pushed it, you know, out of the forefront. But this maybe could be it. It kind of depends, I guess, on what Stormcloak aggressors are. Whether or not they're going to be, you know, 2/2s with some sort of other keyword. Maybe they're like 2/2s with breakthrough as opposed to guard like the troopers. Maybe they're just 3/1s. Maybe they have charge. I mean, who knows, right? Like, again, I'm going to err on the side of they're probably meant to be aggressive. And so this card is this cool, like, do you want to be aggressive and in the field lane or defensive and in the shadow lane? It's also interesting because if you really need the defenses, but you need them in the field lane, then this card is useless. Or if you're trying to be aggressive, but the control player has taken control of the field lane, then having to dump all your guys there might be unfavorable. So it's certainly a card that allows for counterplay if you suspect it to be coming, which I also think is cool. There's a lot about this card I like, and that's even without seeing the card Stormcloak aggressors. Like, I just think this is an interesting design piece. The fact that it is an 8-cost action is potentially relevant because you're going to be competing with, like, Dawn's Wrath. So I say that because, like, if you are using this as an aggressive player or maybe in like some sort of token strategy, this is the right cost for you fill the board up or you fill one lane, maybe your lane stacking. If a control player punishes you with a Dawn's Wrath, then you can turn around and just plain answer by refilling the board again. In fact, again, getting ahead of ourselves, we haven't seen the rest of the set, but if you're going with a Spellsword token list, and you play a Bone Colossus and then follow up with this, you could have a pretty powerful, like, 1-2 punch, depending. There's just, like I was saying, I think there's a lot about this card to like, even if you don't know what the aggressors do. I think that it's pretty clear that you can infer that it's meant to be something aggressive, but yeah, I'm kind of digging this card right now. So that is the first 5 cards of Heroes of Skyrim, and we can't really tell if they're going to be good or not, but they're legendaries, so that's exciting, and they're the first looks that we get, so that's exciting, and the art is beautiful in my opinion, and there's a lot of new mechanics that are at least referenced. You know, discard pile getting buffs, shouts, some new card called Stormcloak aggressors. Yeah, new stuff. Really makes me excited. I can't wait to see what else is coming. If you haven't checked out that article, I highly recommend it because they do also mention that we should expect to see some things about companions, and we should expect to see some things about like werewolves and using the change mechanic. There was an article about the change mechanic, and I think it was like PC Gamer or IGN, I forget which one. I've been trying to read a bunch, but one of them was mentioning this idea of that you'll have certain creatures that'll be in play and they might then change when a rune is broken. So while Little Girl is like, wait a turn, apparently we're going to be getting other ways that creatures can change. So I look forward to that. It'll be interesting to see if there are levels of change. One of the things I talked about in the past was this idea of having creatures that like level up, and so you could do that with the change mechanic very easily, and even have the level requirements be different triggers. There's all sorts of stuff that the change mechanic allows for, but personally I have a thing for werewolves, so I'm really excited to see werewolves, and hopefully they do something with the change mechanic with that. But yeah, nothing but excitement. Lots and lots of excitement on my end. I'm trying to be as enthusiastic as possible because I have a raging headache as I film this right now, but trust me, I am really jacked. Hopefully you guys are too, and I look forward to covering more reveals as they come. So as always, thanks for watching, and I will catch you guys next time.